driven through his hands and feet, and hangs with all his weight on his hand, the bones of his hands and the bones of his feet. He has a spear run up under his lungs, or under his rib cage, into his lungs, pulled out so that blood and water flows. He doesn't die. He just swoons, just goes unconscious, and then 3 days later, this is great, just wakes up. Oh, I'm not dead. Moves the stone and then catches this, walks 7 miles to Emmaus. Now, I have stubbed my toe before and been unable to walk without looking like something went wrong in my hips. And the best secular historians can come up with is the swoon theory. That grief was so severe among Jesus' followers that they just imagined they saw him to the point of death. Like, for all the prosperity crap in our day and age, everybody seems to die pretty badly in the New Testament. Don't they? I mean, Peter didn't get a house on the Italian Riviera. He got crucified upside down. John got boiled alive and didn't die, so they freaked him out, so they exiled him to Patmos. You want to keep going? I mean, it doesn't get a lot better. James, the brother of Jesus, is thrown off the Temple Mount lands, breaks his legs. They order him to recant. He still won't recant. He begins to pray for him. They take a stick and mash in his face. So grief drove all that for years. In fact, Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 makes an appeal to the Corinthians, not based on faith, but based on people who had seen Jesus resurrected. So 60 years after the resurrection, Paul's saying there were 500 people that saw him, many of whom are still alive, although some have fallen asleep. He's not making an appeal to faith, is he? No, he's saying people saw this. I'm not making this up. Go ask. So you have Jesus being the firstborn from among the dead, which means for those who have put their faith in him, death has no sting, death has no victory, death can be looked at and smiled at. Now, let me keep reading. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. Now listen to this. And through him to reconcile to himself all things. Listen to this. Whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace by the blood of his cross. Now, this is going to speak to what I believe is an evangelical misplaced boredom. All right? So Christ is reconciling by his life, death, and resurrection, not just you and me, not just those who put their faith in him, but he's reconciling all things unto himself. Now, what you have to understand is that when sin entered the world, it fractured everything, not just people, but it fractured even the invisible, even the thrones and the dominions, and even the things God created to be good and lovely. They grew perverse and broken. Let me try to give you a couple of examples. Since I know the series Mars Hill is in, you know, sex was God's idea. Like, that was on him. He's the one that created certain cells that swell, certain cells that secrete, and I'm not going to go any farther than that for my own comfort. All right, but God does that. No point in the creation narrative does Satan slip in and switch things up. I'm going to give you this, you these, all right? That doesn't happen. God, that's out of control. I apologize, all right? He doesn't, like, create man and woman, go to get himself something to eat, and then come back and go, no, sir, you get off her. That is not what I gave you that for. That's not how it worked. It's God's idea, and then God actually unpacks it by saying, be fruitful and multiply. Eat, drink your fill, you lovers. But hear me. Sex was given as a gift of common grace to all mankind to be used within certain parameters for the joy of mankind and for the glory of God. So he puts parameters around it to protect us and to lead us into the fullness of joy, to wire us into how he designed the thing to work. When sin enters the world, it fractures that, and sex becomes, instead of the mingling of souls, it becomes instead lust and pornography, and no longer are we looking at people as they are souls, they instead are objects, and all of that occurs. After the fall, and in Christ, sex is reconciled. Food is reconciled. Food was given to us by God so that God might be worshiped. Like, who do you think came up with those flavors? Remember that scene in The Matrix where they're eating the slop and the guy was like, how do the machines know what chicken tastes like? What if chicken tastes like steak and steak tastes like chicken? What if they messed it up? In reality, God created the flavors, and then he created the new flavors that exist when you mix flavors. I mean, that's God's idea, and what that was meant to do is create worship in our heart. And it doesn't terminate on the fajita. It terminates on the God of the fajita. So, we're Seattle Mexican food. I'm sorry, I should have gone something else. Coffee. All right? And so, Folgers, that's what you guys do. I'm sorry, we don't have time. We don't have time. Stop it. I don't drink that. We don't have time. What you have happening is Christ is going to reconcile all things unto himself, which means he's going to redeem all that went wrong in the fall. And so that changes our perspective on injustice. That changes our perspective and our role when it comes to oppression. That changes our view of the world around us, because not only have we been reconciled into Christ, but we have been made agents of reconciliation to the world around us. So I think the reason that some of us feel bored in our faith is we don't quite understand how big this thing is. I mean, God is into cosmic renewal. And you have been uniquely wired and uniquely placed to play a part in God renewing all things unto himself. And so, man, some of you have been given some really sweet intrinsic gifts. Some of you, business is just, it's easy for you, all right? Some of you, you're great artists. Some of you are great architects. Some of you are great students. That's all I can say for you right now. It's been 15 years. You're still doing it, all right? You're like in your 6th degree. All right, some of you are great in the field of medicine. You've got natural abilities and passions, and I want you to hear me say this to you. God created that in you and put that in you because he's going to use you within the domain of culture that he has placed you to redeem and reconcile all things unto himself. So for a Christian to be bored means a Christian doesn't quite understand his or her calling. Because what we learned from the scriptures, if we looked at Acts 17 and we looked at Psalm 139, is that God has uniquely wired me and uniquely placed me so that men might seek him and find him, though he is not far from any of them. So the lenses, you put those lenses on, that means when I go to my house, that I'm in that house on purpose by the design of God so that Rich and Martha and Brian and Rhonda and our neighbors might know Jesus Christ. Now, ultimately, can I save them? No, but I can certainly herald the good news. And I can cook a mean brisket and have them over and answer any questions. And I can serve them in any way I can think. And I can pray for them. And I can pray for their children. And I can have them into my home. And I can see how all of a sudden my neighborhood isn't just where I live. It's where God has placed me on mission. And it doesn't work as well for me to use work because I am a pastor of a church. And you kind of got to be a believer to work there. You're just a much better pastor when you're saved than when you're not. And so, but for you, that guy in the cubicle next to you, in the office next to you, the workspace that you share, which just means you're entry level and probably in someone's closet. Right? Like all of that, that's God's stuff. The gifts God's given you in regards to domain, that's God's stuff. To utilize that and to use that for the kingdom brings purpose and weight to our lives that's absent without it. All right, let me finish this out. Verse 21, and you who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death in order to present you, now catch this, holy and blameless and above reproach before him, if indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel